Hi, I'm Melissa, and this is The Book Break. Today I'm talking to Andrew Robinson, a writer for comics and all kinds of other fun TV projects. Let's go! All right, so I'm so excited to talk to you, Andrew. Now, you have a ton of experience in the film world, both film, screenplay writing. Tell me a little bit more about your background.
It's more television, to be fair, and mostly in television animation. I've written on over 30 animated television series, mostly in what they call the boys action genre. A lot of superhero shows. I've written on 2 Spider-Man series. I've written on 5 or 6 Transformers shows. Guardians of the Galaxy, for example, Young Justice.
What's the end game? The Peace Summit or Luther himself?
I have a fairly deep experience in television animation.
So for prospective writers out there, what do you think is, first, what was your path? And then what do you think would be a good path for them to try?
My path into
writing in TV and animation.
Sure. I actually wanted to be a drama writer. So I was writing spec scripts, pilots, and I had written a spec for a show, and it got the attention of a producer. I had optioned a pilot here and there to producers, and what got me hired on my first show, which was called Roughnecks, the Starship Trooper Chronicles, was an NYPD Blue spec.
Oh, wow.
Of all things, about 20 years ago. And I had an opportunity. I was familiar with the Starship Trooper franchise and just took the opportunity, and they liked what I did, and I kept getting hired. And ironically, the next show that I was hired for was a preschool show. Oh, wow. Which is a very different thing.
Oh, yeah. I'm a preschooler, so I know.
And from then, then it was a matter of building contacts and making people like me and want to hire me again.
Yeah. That's great. And so you've also worked with comic books, right?
Sure.
Tell me a little bit of that.
I had sold a pilot to a network, an option to pilot to a network, and it had come back to me. And I had the idea, because I had so many friends working in comics, that I wanted to do a comic book of that pilot. It was sort of a fantasy story. And so I began to do that, and I had some help from friends, and I got a certain amount of the way in before I ironically optioned it to another network as a script, and it went into development. And since then, I went fallow until I began working for Blizzard. And at Blizzard, I began writing comics for this game called Overwatch. Sort of a lot of what we'll call one-shots about specific characters and their place in the world and how they view everything and the things that happen to them. And in addition, I've written a few comics for StarCraft. We had a short series of comics for StarCraft that came out, published by Dark Horse, and comics for World of Warcraft. Yeah.
What are the steps someone could take to potentially get into this?
Get into
writing with comics, writing with screenplays.
I think the barrier to gaining the skill set is lower than it's ever been. Partly it's just start doing it. There are now courses for learning to write comics. There have obviously been courses for writing screenplays for many years. There are things that you can pick up online. You can pick up books. I would say find yourself a peer group who can give feedback and who are dedicated to the same kind of thing that you are. And also, one of the ways that you osmose knowledge about the subject is read a lot of comics. If you want to learn to be a screenwriter, you got to read a lot of screenplays. It's not, the form of a screenplay is slightly different from the form of the finished movie. So observing how a screenplay transforms into a film is also useful, I think. But you got to do it.
Right. Well, and writing screenplays is vastly different than writing a book, too.
Absolutely.
So they definitely need to go and study that, like you were saying. And are there conferences that prospective screenplay writers can go to, or different ways for them to meet these peer groups?
I would assume that all over the country there are people who want to be screenwriters, as I said, I'm sure there are online courses that are dedicated to that. So I think if you have the desire, you're going to find a way.
Yeah. And when you have written for comics, did you find your own illustrators, or was that something where you submitted, they found illustrators for you?
When I was doing my own, I reached out to friends who are comic book writers. And who are known quantities, and I have that luxury because I had made contacts as when I was in the film industry and the television industry to have that, and I got some great references, and I worked with I found the person that I wanted to work with. And that was a great way. There are websites where comic artists post their work, and I believe that there are websites where writers and artists can find each other. There are, if I'm not mistaken, if you go to conventions like pop culture conventions or comic book conventions, there will be creator meetups. And that might be a good way for an artist to find a writer, or a writer to find an artist.
Yeah, that's great.
And there are cons all over the country now.
There are, yeah. Some of those are specific panels on how to do that, too.
Sure.
Yeah, that's great. And what did you specifically do to get in? Because you've mentioned when you were in the film industry, you met people. What were some of the paths that you took to get there?
There are 100 paths to become a successful writer. And as I said, I grew up in LA. I knew people in the industry. Can you introduce me to this person who works at this agency?
Yeah.
Can I get an interview?
Yeah.
And not everybody has that, so I'm not sure that my experience is relevant.
Networking is absolutely.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
For what that's worth, I think part of the path to becoming a successful writer, because that's the only thing I can speak to, is you got to develop your skill set. But yes, you've got to network. You have to put yourself out there. You have to become a known quantity, not just to your own peers, but reach out to people who are working writers and befriend them without being obsequious.
Right.
So that when an opportunity arises, they go, hey, that person I know who has a pretty good writer who I like, maybe I should give them a shot.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
It's a pleasure.
It's been good. And thank you for joining us on the Book Break. We'll see you next time.